The Teachings of Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi in his own words. Edited by Arthur Osborne. Preface. During the half-century and more of his life at Tiruvannamalai, Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi was visited by a constant stream of people from all parts of India, and by many from the West, seeking spiritual guidance or consolation in grief, or simply the experience of his presence. He wrote very little all these years, but a number of records of his talks with visitors were kept and subsequently published by his ashram. These are mostly in diary form, with little arrangement according to subject. The purpose of the present book is to build up a general exposition of the Maharishi's teachings by selecting and fitting together passages from these dialogues and from his writings. Published as The Collected Works of Sri Ramana Maharshi by Messrs. Ryder and Company in England and by Sri Ramana Ashram in India. The editor's comments have been kept to a minimum and are printed in smaller type to distinguish them clearly from the Maharishi's own words. No distinction is made between the periods at which the Maharishi made any statement, and none is needed. For he was not a philosopher working out a system, but a realized man speaking from direct knowledge. It sometimes happens that one who is on a spiritual path, or even who has not yet begun consciously seeking, has a glimpse of realization during which, for a brief eternity, he experiences absolute certainty of his divine, immutable, universal self. Such an experience came to the Maharishi when he was a lad of 16. He himself has described it. Begin. It was about 6 weeks before I left Madurai for good that the great change in my life took place. It was quite sudden. I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health, but a sudden, violent fear of death overtook me. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, and I did not try to account for it or to find out whether there was any reason for the fear. I just felt I am going to die, and began thinking what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor, or my elders, or friends. I felt that I had to solve the problem myself, there and then. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, and I said to myself mentally, without actually framing the words, "Now death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? The body dies?" And I at once dramatized the occurrence of death. I lay with my limbs stretched out stiff as though rigor mortis had set in, and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to the inquiry. I held my breath and kept my lips tightly closed so that no sound could escape, so that neither the word I nor any other word could be uttered. "Well then," I said to myself, "this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground and there burnt and reduced to ashes. But with the death of this body, am I dead? Is the body I? Is it silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality, and even the voice of the I within me, apart from it? So I am spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it cannot be touched by death. That means I am the deathless spirit." All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truth which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something very real, the only real thing about my present state, and all the conscious activity connected with my body was centered on that I. From that moment onwards, the I, or self, focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. fear of death had vanished once and for all. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. End. It is the last sentence that is the most remarkable, because usually such an experience soon passes, although the impression of certainty that it leaves on the mind is never afterwards forgotten. Very rare are the cases when it remains permanent, leaving a man thenceforth in constant identity with the universal self. Such a one was the Maharshi. Soon after this change occurred, the youth who was later to be known as the Maharshi left home as a sadhu. He made his way to Tiruvannamalai, the town at the foot of the holy hill of Arunachala, and remained there for the rest of his life. For a while he sat immersed in divine bliss, not speaking, scarcely eating, utterly neglecting the body he no longer needed. Gradually, however, devotees gathered around him, and, for their sake, he returned to an outwardly normal life. Many of them, craving instruction, brought him books to read and expound, and he thus became learned almost by accident, neither seeking nor valuing learning. The ancient teaching of non-duality that he thus acquired merely formalized what he had already realized. He has explained this himself. Begin. I had read no books except the Periya Puranam, the Bible, and bits of Thayumanavar or Thevaram. My conception of Ishvara was similar to that found in the Puranas. I had never heard of Brahman, Samsara, and so forth. I did not yet know that there was an essence or impersonal real underlying everything, and that Ishvar and I were both identical with it. Later at Tiruvannamalai, as I listened to the Rebhu-gita and other sacred books, I learned all this and found that the books were analyzing and naming what I had felt intuitively without analysis or name. End. Perhaps something should be said about the Maharshi's way of answering questions. There was nothing heavy or pontifical about it. He spoke freely, and his replies were often given with laughter and humor. If the questioner was not satisfied, he was free to object or ask further questions. It has been said that the Maharshi taught in silence, but this does not mean that he gave no verbal expositions, only that these were not the essential teaching. That was experienced as a silent influence in the heart. The power of his presence was overwhelming and his beauty indescribable, and yet, at the same time, he was utterly simple, utterly natural, unassuming, unpretentious, unaffected. For the sake of uniformity, the questioner has been referred to in the dialogues in this book as D, standing for devotee, except in cases where the name is given or where for some reason the word devotee would not apply. The Maharshi has been referred to as B, standing for Bhagwan, since it was usual to address him by this name and in the third person. Actually, it is a common word used to mean God, but it is used also in those rare cases where a man is felt to be, as Christ put it, one with the Father. It is the same as the name for the Buddha, commonly translated into English as the Blessed One. So far as is possible, Sanskrit words have been avoided, and it usually has been possible. The purpose of this is to make the book easier to read and also to avoid giving the false impression that the quest of self-realization is some intricate science which can be understood only with the knowledge of Sanskrit terminology. It is true that there are spiritual sciences which have a necessary technical terminology, but they are more indirect. the clear and simple truth of non-duality which Bhagwan taught, and the direct path of self-inquiry which he enjoined, can be expounded in simple language, and indeed he himself expounded them so to Western visitors, without having recourse to Sanskrit terminology. In the rare cases where a Sanskrit term has seemed necessary or useful in this book, its appropriate meaning has been indicated in brackets, so that no glossary is necessary. It may also be remarked that the English words enlightenment, liberation, and self-realization have all been used with the same meaning to correspond with the Sanskrit words jnana, moksha, and mukti. In places where the English of the source quoted seemed infelicitous, it has been altered. This implies no infidelity to the text, since the replies were mostly given in Tamil or other South Indian languages and later rendered into English. The meaning has not been changed. Signed, Arthur Osborne. Chapter 1. The Basic Theory. Readers of a philosophical turn of mind may find it strange to see the first chapter of this work entitled The Basic Theory. It may appear to them that the whole work should be devoted to theory. In fact, however, the Maharishi, like every spiritual master, was concerned rather with the practical work of training aspirants than with expounding theory. The theory had importance, but only as a basis for practice. D. Buddha is said to have ignored questions about God. B. Yes, and because of this he has been called an agnostic. In fact, Buddha was concerned with guiding the seeker to realize bliss here and now, rather than with academic discussions about God and so forth. D. Is the study of science, psychology, physiology, etc. helpful for attaining yoga liberation or for intuitive understanding of the unity of reality? B. Very little. Some theoretical knowledge is needed for yoga and may be found in books, but practical application is what is needed. Personal example and instruction are the most helpful aids. As for intuitive understanding, a person may laboriously convince himself of the truth to be grasped by intuition, of its function and nature, but the actual intuition is more like feeling and requires practical and personal contact. Mere book learning is not of any great use. After realization, all intellectual loads are useless burdens and are to be thrown overboard. What use is the learning of those who do not seek to wipe out the letters of destiny from their brow by inquiring, whence is the birth of us who know the letters? They have sunk to the level of a gramophone. What else are they, O Arunachala? It is those who are not learned that are saved, rather than those whose ego has not yet subsided in spite of their learning. The unlearned are saved from the relentless grip of the devil of self-infatuation. They are saved from the malady of a myriad whirling thoughts and words. They are saved from running after wealth. It is from more than one evil that they are saved. It is due to illusion born of ignorance that men fail to recognize that which is always and for everybody the inherent reality dwelling in its natural heart center, and to abide in it. And that instead they argue that it exists or does not exist, that it has form or has not form, or is non-dual or is dual. Can anything appear apart from that which is eternal and perfect? This kind of dispute is endless. Do not engage in it. Instead, turn your mind inward and put an end to all this. There is no finality in disputations. Ultimately, even the scriptures are useless. The scriptures serve to indicate the existence of the higher power or self and to point the way to it. That is their essential purpose. Apart from that, they are useless. However, they are voluminous in order to be adapted to the level of development of every seeker. As a man rises in the scale, he finds the stages already attained to be only stepping stones to higher stages, until finally the goal is reached. When that happens, the goal alone remains, and everything else, including the scriptures, become useless. The intricate maze of philosophy of the various schools is said to clarify matters and to reveal the truth. But in fact, it creates confusion where none need exist. To understand anything, there must be the self. The self is obvious. So why not remain as the self? What need to explain the non-self? I was indeed fortunate that I never took to it. That is philosophy. Had I taken to it, I would probably be nowhere. But my inherent tendencies led me directly to inquire, who am I? How fortunate. The world, real or illusion? Nevertheless, some theoretical teaching is necessary as the basis for the practical work of spiritual training. With the Maharishi, this took the form of non-duality, in complete accordance with the teachings of the great sage Shankara. The agreement does not, however, mean that Bhagwan was, as a philosopher would put it, influenced by Shankara, merely that the recognized Shankara's teachings as a true exposition of what he had realized and knew by direct knowledge. D. Is Bhagwan's teaching the same as Shankara's? B. Bhagwan's teaching is an expression of his own experience and realization. Others find that it tallies with Sri Shankara's. D. When the Upanishads say that all is Brahman, how can we agree with Shankara that this world is illusory? B. Shankara also said that this world is Brahman, or the self. What he objected to is one's imagining that the self is limited by the names and forms that constitute the world. He only said that the world has no reality apart from Brahman. Brahman, or the self, is like a cinema screen and the world like the pictures on it. You can see the picture only so long as there is a screen. But when the observer himself becomes the screen, only the self remains. Shankara has been criticized for his philosophy of Maya, or illusion, without understanding his meaning. He made 3 statements: that Brahman is real, that the universe is unreal, and that Brahman is the universe. He did not stop with the second. The 3rd statement explains the first 2. It signifies that when the universe is perceived apart from Brahman, that perception is false and illusory. What it amounts to is that phenomena are real when experienced as the self and illusory when seen apart from the self. The self alone exists and is real. The world, the individual, and God are like the illusory appearance of silver in the mother of pearl, imaginary creations in the self, They appear and disappear simultaneously. Actually, the self alone is the world, the I, and God. All that exists in only a manifestation of the Supreme. D. What is reality? B. Reality must always be real. It has no names or forms, but is what underlies them. It underlies all limitations, being itself limitless. It is not bound in any way. It underlies unrealities, being itself real. It is that which is. It is as it is. It transcends speech and is beyond description such as being or non-being. D. The Buddhists deny the world, whereas Hindu philosophy admits its existence but calls it unreal. Isn't that so? B. It is only a difference of point of view. D. They say that the world is created by divine energy, Shakti. Is the knowledge of unreality due to the veiling of illusion, Maya? B. All admit creation by the divine energy. But what is the nature of this energy? It must be in conformity with the nature of its creation. D. Are there degrees of illusion? B. Illusion itself is illusory. It must be seen by somebody outside it. But how can such a seer be subject to it? So how can he speak of degrees of it? You see various scenes passing on a cinema screen. Fire seems to burn buildings to ashes. Water seems to wreck ships. But the screen on which the pictures are projected remains unburned and dry. Why? Because the pictures are unreal and the screen real. Similarly, reflections pass through a mirror, but it is not affected at all by their number or quality. In the same way, the world is a phenomena upon the substratum of the single reality, which is not affected by it in any way. Reality is only one. Talk of illusion is due only to the point of change of view. Change your viewpoint to that of knowledge, and you will perceive the universe to be only Brahman. Being now immersed in the world, you see it as a real world. Get beyond it, and it will disappear, and reality alone will remain. The world is perceived as an apparent objective reality when the mind is externalized, thereby abandoning its identity with the self. When the world is thus perceived, the true nature of the self is not revealed. Conversely, when the self is realized, the world ceases to appear as an objective reality. That is illusion which makes one take what is ever present and all-pervasive, full to perfection, and self-luminous, and is indeed the self and the core of one's being, for non-existent and unreal. Conversely, that is illusion which makes one take for real and self-existent what is non-existent and unreal, namely the triology of world, ego, and God. To those who have not realized the self, as well as to those who have, the world is real. But to the former, truth is adapted to the form of the world, whereas to the latter, truth shines as the formless perfection and the substratum of the world. This is the only difference between them. As I recall Bhagwan sometimes saying that unreal, mithya or imaginary, and real, satyam, mean the same, but did not quite understand, I asked him about it. He said, "Yes, I do sometimes say that. What do you mean by real? What is it that you call real?" I answered, "According to Vedanta, only that which is permanent and unchanging can be called real. That is the meaning of reality." Then Bhagwan said, "The names and forms which constitute the world continually change and perish, and are therefore called unreal. It is unreal to limit the self to these names and forms, and real to regard all as the self." The non-dualist says that the world is unreal, but he also says all this is Brahman. So it is clear that what he condemns is regarding the world as objectively real in itself, not regarding it as Brahman. He who sees the self alone in the world also. It is immaterial to the enlightened whether the world appears or not. In either case, his attention is turned to the self. It is like the letters and the paper on which they are printed. You are so engrossed in the letters that you forget about the paper. But the enlightened sees the paper as the substratum, whether the letter appears on it or not. The Vedantins do not say that the world is unreal. That is a misunderstanding. If they did, what would be the meaning of the Vedantic text, "All this is Brahman"? They only mean that the world is unreal as world, but real as self. If you regard the world as non-self, it is not real. Everything, whether you call it illusion or maya, or divine play and leela, or energy, shakti, must be within the self and not apart from it. D. The Vedas contain conflicting accounts of cosmogony. Ether is said to be the first creation in one place, vital energy in another, water in another, something else in another. How can all this be reconciled? Does it not impair the credibility of the Vedas? B. Different seers saw different aspects of truth at different times, each emphasizing some viewpoint. Why do you worry about their conflicting statements? The essential aim of the Vedas is to teach us the nature of the imperishable self and show us that we are that. D. About that part I am satisfied. B. Then treat all the rest as auxiliary arguments or as expositions for the ignorant who want to know the origin of things. Major Chadwick was copying out English translation of the Tamil Kavalya Navinitha when he came across some of the technical terms in it which he had difficulty in understanding. He accordingly asked Bhagwan about them, and Bhagwan replied, "These portions deal with theories of creation. They are not essential, because the real purpose of the scriptures is not to set forth such theories. They mention the theories casually, so that those readers who wish to may take interest in them. The truth is that the world appears as a passing shadow in a flood of light. Light is necessary even to see the shadow. The shadow is not worth any special study, analysis, or discussion. The purpose of the book is to deal with the self, and what is said about creation may be omitted for the present. Later, Sri Bhagwan continued. Vedanta says that the cosmos springs into view simultaneously with him who sees it, and there is no detailed process of creation. It is similar to a dream where he who experiences the dream arises simultaneously with the dream he experiences. However, some people cling so fast to objective knowledge that they are not satisfied when told this. They want to know how sudden creation can be possible and argue that an effect must be preceded by a cause. In fact, they desire an explanation of the world that they see about them. Therefore, the scriptures try to satisfy their curiosity by such theories. This method of dealing with the subject is called the theory of gradual creation. But the true spiritual seeker can be satisfied with instantaneous creation. The nature of man. We come now to the very essence of theory, the nature of man himself. For whatever a man may think of the reality of the world or of God, he knows that he himself exists. And it is in order to understand and at the same time to perfect himself that he studies and seeks guidance. The individual being which identifies its existence with that of the life in the physical body as I is called the ego. The self, which is pure consciousness, has no ego sense about it. Neither can the physical body, which is inert in itself, have this ego sense. Between the two, that is between the self or pure consciousness and the inert physical body, there arises mysteriously the ego sense or I notion, the hybrid which is neither of them, and this flourishes as an individual being. This ego or individual being is at the root of all that is futile and undesirable in life. Therefore, it is to be destroyed by any possible means. Then that which ever is alone remains resplendent. This is liberation, or enlightenment, or self-realization. D. Bhagwan often says, the world is not outside you, or everything depends on you, or what is there outside you? I find all this puzzling. The world existed before I was born and will continue to exist after my death, as it has survived the death of so many who once lived as I do now. B. Did I ever say that the world exists because of you? I have only put you the question, what exists apart from yourself? You ought to understand that by the self neither the physical body nor the subtle body is meant. What you are told is that if you once know the self within all ideas exists, not including the idea of yourself, of others like you, and of the world, you can realize the truth that there is a reality, a supreme truth, which is the self of all the world you now see, the self of all the selves, the one real, the supreme, the eternal self, as distinct from the ego or individual being which is impermanent. You must not mistake the ego or the bodily idea for the self. D. Then Bhagwan means that the self is God? B. You see the difficulty? Self-inquiry, who am I, is a different technique from the meditation, I am Shiva or I am He. It rather emphasizes self-knowledge, for you are first concerned with yourself before you proceed to know the world or its Lord. The I am He or I am Brahman meditation is more or less mental, but the quest for the self of which I speak is a direct method and is superior to it. For the moment you get into the quest for the self and begin to go deeper, the real self is waiting there to receive you, and then whatever is to be done is done by something else, and you, as an individual, have no hand in it. In this process, all doubts and discussions are automatically given up, just as one who sleeps forgets all his cares for the time being. D. What certainty is there that something awaits there to receive me? B. When a person is sufficiently mature, he becomes convinced naturally. D. How is this maturity to be attained? B. Various ways are prescribed, but whatever previous development there may be, earnest self-inquiry hastens it. D. That is arguing in a circle. I am strong enough for the quest if I am mature, and it is the quest that makes me mature. B. The mind does have this sort of difficulty. It wants a fixed theory to satisfy itself with. Really, however, no theory is necessary for the man who seriously strives to approach God or his true self. Everyone is the self, and indeed is infinite. Yet, each person mistakes his body for his self. In order to know anything, illumination is necessary. This can only be of the nature of light. However, it lights up both physical light and physical darkness. That is to say, that it lies beyond apparent light and darkness. It is neither, but it is said to be light because it illumines both. It is infinite and is consciousness. Consciousness is the self of which everyone is aware. No one is ever away from the self, and therefore everyone is in fact self-realized. Only, and this is the greatest mystery, people do not know this and want to realize the self. Realization consists only in getting rid of the false idea that one is not realized. It is not anything new to be acquired. It must already exist, or it would not be eternal, and only what is eternal is worth striving for. Once the false notion, I am the body, or I am not realized, has been removed, supreme consciousness or the self alone remains. And in people's present state of knowledge, they call this realization. But the truth is that realization is eternal and already exists. here and now. Consciousness is pure knowledge. The mind arises out of it and is made up of thoughts. The essence of the mind is only awareness or consciousness. However, when the ego overclouds it, it functions as reasoning, thinking, or perceiving. The universal mind, not being limited by the ego, has nothing outside itself and is therefore only aware. That is what the Bible means by I am that I am. The ego-ridden mind has its strength sapped and is too weak to resist distressing thoughts. The egoless mind is happy, as we see in deep, dreamless sleep. Clearly, therefore, happiness and distress are only modes of the mind. D. When I seek the I see nothing. B. You say that because you are accustomed to identify yourself with the body and sight with the eyes. But what is there to be seen? And by whom? And how? There is only one consciousness, and this, when it identifies itself with the body, projects itself through the eyes and sees the surrounding objects. The individual is limited to the waking state. He expects to see something different and accepts the authority of his senses. He will not admit that he who sees the objects seen and the act of seeing are all manifestations of the same consciousness, the I. Meditation helps to overcome the illusion that the self is something to see. Actually, there is nothing to see. How do you recognize yourself now? Do you have to hold a mirror up in front of yourself to recognize yourself? The awareness is itself the I. Realize it, and that is the truth. D. When I inquire into the origin of thoughts, there is the perception of the I, but it does not satisfy me. B. Quite right. But because this perception of I is associated with the form, perhaps with the physical body, nothing should be associated with the pure self. The self is the pure reality in whose light the body, the ego, and all else shine. When all thoughts are stilled, pure consciousness remains over. D. How did the ego arise? B. There is no ego. If there were, you would have to admit of two selves in you. Therefore, there is no ignorance. If you inquire into the self, ignorance, which is already non-existent, will be found not to exist, and you will say that it has fled. Absence of thought does not mean a blank. There must be someone to be aware of that blank. Knowledge and ignorance pertain only to the mind and are in duality. But the self is beyond them both. It is pure light. There is no need for one self to see another. There are no two selves. What is not the self is mere non-self and cannot see the self. The self has no sight or hearing. It lies beyond them, all alone, as pure consciousness. D. I don't know whether the self is different from the ego. B. In what state were you in deep sleep? D. I don't know. B. Who doesn't know? The waking self? But you don't deny that you existed while in deep sleep? D. I was and am, but I don't know who was in deep sleep. B. Exactly. The waking man says that he did not know anything in the state of deep sleep. Now he sees objects and knows that he exists. But in deep sleep, there were no objects and no spectator. And yet, the same person who is speaking now existed in deep sleep also. What is the difference between the two states? There are objects and the play of the senses now, while in deep sleep, they were not. A new entity, the ego, has arisen. It acts through the senses, sees objects, confuses itself with the body, and claims to be the self. In reality, what was in deep sleep continues to be now also. The self is changeless. It is the ego which has come between. That which rises and sets is the ego. That which remains changeless is the self. Waking, dream, and sleep are mere phases of the mind, not of the self. The self is the witness of these three states. Your true nature exists in sleep. D. But we are advised not to fall asleep during meditation. B. It is stupor which you must guard against. That sleep which alternates with waking is not the true sleep. That waking which alternates with sleep is not the true waking. Are you awake now? No. What you have to do is to wake up to your true state. You should neither fall into false sleep nor remain falsely awake. Though present even in sleep, the self is not then perceived. It cannot be known in sleep straight away. It must first be realized in the waking state, for it is our true nature underlying all the three states. Effort must be made in the waking state and the self realized here and now. It will then be understood to be the continuous self, uninterrupted by the alteration of waking, dream, and deep sleep. Death and rebirth. In nothing did Bhagwan show more clearly that theory has to be adapted to the understanding of the seeker than in the question of death and rebirth. For those who are capable of grasping pure non-dual theory, he explained merely that the question does not arise. For if the ego has no real existence, now it has none after death either. D. Do a person's actions in this life affect him in future births? B. Are you born now? Why do you think of future births? The truth is that there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born think of death and palliatives for it. D. Is the Hindu doctrine of reincarnation right? B. No definite answer is possible. even the present incarnation is denied. For instance, in the Bhagavad Gita. D. Isn't our personality beginningless? B. Find out first whether it exists at all, and after you have solved that problem, ask the question. Namalwar says, in ignorance I took the ego to be the self, but with right knowledge the ego is not, and only you remain as the self. But the non-dualists and the dualist agree on the necessity for self-realization. Attain that first, and then raise other questions. Non-dualism or dualism cannot be decided on theoretical grounds alone. If the self is realized, the question will not arise. Whatever is born must die. Whatever is acquired must be lost. But were you born? You are eternally existent. The self can never be lost. They say, D. They say that we have the choice of enjoying merit or demerit after our death, that it depends on our choice which comes. Is that so? B. Why raise questions of what happens after death? Why ask whether you are born, whether you are reaping the fruits of your past karma, and so on? You will not raise such questions in a little while when you fall asleep. Why? Are you a different person now from the one you are when asleep? No, you are not. Find out why such questions do not occur to you when you are asleep. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna in Chapter 2 that no one was born, and then in Chapter 4, there have been numerous incarnations, both of you and me. I know them, but you do not. Which of these statements is true? The teaching varies according to the understanding of the listener. When Arjuna said that he would not fight against his relatives and elders in order to kill them and gain the kingdom, Sri Krishna said, not that these, you or I, were not born before, are not now, nor will be thereafter. None was born, none has died, nor will it be so hereafter. He further developed this theme, saying that he had given instructions to the sun and through him to Ikshvaku, and Arjuna queried how that could be, since he had been born only a few days back, while they lived ages ago. Then Sri Krishna saw his point of view and said, yes, there have been many incarnations of you and me. I know them all, but you do not. Such statements appear contradictory, but they are true according to the viewpoint of the questioner. Christ also said, before Abraham was, I am. Just as in dreams, you wake up after several new experiences, so after death, another body is found. Just as rivers lose their individuality when they discharge their waters into the ocean, and yet the waters evaporate and return as rain on the hills and back again through the rivers to the ocean, so also individuals lose their individuality when they go to sleep, but return again according to their previous innate tendencies. Similarly, in death also, being is not lost. D. How can that be? B. See how a tree grows again when its branches are cut off? So long as the life source is not destroyed, it will grow. Similarly, latent potentialities withdraw into the heart at death, but do not perish. That is how beings are reborn. In truth, there is neither seed nor tree. There is only being. D. How long is the interval between death and rebirth? B. It may be long or short, but a realized man undergoes no such change. He merges into the infinite being, as is said in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Some say that those who, after death, take the path of light are not reborn, whereas those who take the path of darkness are born after they have reaped their karma or self-made destiny in their subtle bodies. If a man's merits and demerits are equal, he is reborn immediately on earth. If the merits outweigh the demerits, his subtle body goes first to heaven, while if the demerits outweigh the merits, he goes first to hell. But in either case, he is later reborn on earth. All this is described in the scriptures, but in fact, there is neither birth nor death. One simply remains what one really is. That only is the truth. God in His mercy withholds this knowledge from people. If they knew that they had been virtuous, they would grow proud, and in the other case, they would be despondent. Both are bad. It is enough to know the self. A competent person who has already, perhaps in a previous incarnation, qualified himself, realizes the truth and abides in peace as soon as he hears it told to him just once, whereas one who is not qualified has to pass through the various stages before attaining samadhi. That is to say, direct, pure consciousness of being. A science lecturer from a university asked whether the intellect survives a man's death and was told, "Why think of death? Consider what happens in your sleep. What is your experience of that?" D. But sleep is transient, whereas death is not. B. Sleep is intermediate between two waking states, and in the same way death is intermediate between two births. Both are transient. D. I mean, when the spirit is disembodied, does it carry the intellect with it? B. The spirit is not disembodied. The bodies differ. If not a gross body, it will be a subtle one, as in sleep, dream, or daydream. D. Is the Buddhist view that there is no continuous entity answering to the idea of the individual soul right or not? Is this consistent with the Hindu doctrine of reincarnating ego? Is the soul a continuous entity which reincarnates again and again, according to the Hindu doctrine? Or is it a mere conglomeration of mental tendencies? B. The real self is continuous and unaffected. The reincarnating ego belongs to a lower plane, that of thought. It is transcended by self-realization. Reincarnations are due to a spurious offshoot of being and are therefore denied by the Buddhists. The human state is due to a mingling of the sentient with the insentient. Sometimes it was not a question of reincarnation, but grieving over the death of a loved one. A lady who had come from North India asked Bhagwan whether it was possible to know the posthumous state of an individual. B. It is possible. But why try? Such facts are only as real as the person who seeks them. Lady. The birth of a person and his life and death are real to us. B. Because you wrongly identify yourself with the body. You think of the other also as a body. Neither you nor he is the body. Lady. But from my own level of understanding, I regard myself and my son as real. B. The birth of the I thought is a person's birth, and its death is his death. After the I thought has arisen, the wrong identification with the body arises. Identifying yourself with the body makes you falsely identify others also with their bodies. Just as your body was born and grows and will die, so you think the other was also born, grew, and died. Did you think of your son before he was born? The thought came after his birth and continues even after his death. He is your son only insofar as you think of him. Where has he gone? To the source from which he sprang. So long as you continue to exist, he does too. But if you cease to identify yourself with the body and realize the true self, this confusion will vanish. You are eternal, and others also will be found to be eternal. Until this is realized, there will always be grief due to false values which are caused by wrong knowledge and wrong identification. On the death of King George V, two devotees were discussing the matter in the hall and seemed upset. Bhagwan said, "What is it to you who dies or is lost? Die yourself and be lost, becoming one with the self of all." D. Even if I cannot realize in my lifetime, let me at least not forget on my deathbed. Let me have a glimpse of reality at least at the moment of death, so that it may stand me in good stead in the future. B. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 8, that whatever is a person's last thought at death determines his next birth. But it is necessary to experience reality now in this life in order to experience it at death. Consider whether this present moment is any different from the last one at death, and try to be in the desired state.